Calling to order this meeting of the Sacramento Metropolitan Cable Television Commission. This meeting of the Metropolitan Cable Television Commission is cablecast live on Metro Cable 14, the local government affairs channel on Comcast, Consolidated Communications, and AT&T Uverse. This meeting is webcast at www.sacmetrocable.tv. It will be repeated Saturday, June 6th at noon on Metro Cable 14. This meeting is also closed captioned. Members of the audience wishing to address the board should fill out a speaker identification form located at the podium and hand it to the clerk. And with that, Commissioner Schmidt, would you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right. Karen, would you call the roll? Here.
Sorry, my mic is not on. Larry Carr. Steve Detrick.
Here.
Eric Guerra.
Here.
Isaac Gonzalez.
Here.
Steve Hansen. Andy Moran.
Here.
Don Natoli.
Here.
Howard Schmidt.
Here.
Lisa Nava.
Here.
And Sue Frost.
Here.
We have a quorum, sir.
Thank you. And I would like to take a moment to recognize one of our new members who is present, Eric Guerra, new council member from the city of Sacramento. Welcome to the meeting.
Glad to be here.
And I guess time to call the first item.
Item number 1 is conference with legal counsel regarding anticipated litigation.
Okay, so we'll go back here. Great. And the board will adjourn to a closed session right now. Reconvene the regular meeting after the closed session. Legal counsel, is there anything to report out?
There we go. No, there are no reportable actions.
Okay, next item, please.
Item number 2 is the fiscal year 2015-16 proposed budgets for the general fund and the PEG fee fund.
Good afternoon, Bob Davison, your Executive Director. And today, actually for the first time, I have a PowerPoint presentation for the budget presentation today. So if we can get the PowerPoint up on the screen. There we go. So we prepared this year's budget. It's similar to past year budgets. The goals are to effectively run the commission and Metro Cable, provide support for the channel, the PEG channels, the 7 PEG channels, including Metro Cable, and the ones that are operated by the channel licensees. Also to maximize revenue distributions for the member agencies, and also to present a PEG budget that's to the benefit of the member agencies, the channel licensees, Metro Cable, and therefore to the public at large. So with that, I'll go through the budget similar to how it's presented in the staff report, similar to the components that we outlined in the staff report. So here's a pie chart that shows the, first we'll talk about the general fund budget, and then we'll later on talk about the PEG fee fund budget. The general fund proposed budget has a total expenditures of roughly $13.8 million. With that, it's funded by revenues of $13.8 million, and the revenues come from carryover fund balance, mostly franchise fees, interest, miscellaneous revenue. We do get revenue from meetings that we film, that we use a van to shoot, that aren't member agencies and aren't done in this board's chambers. That's the revenues. This pie chart shows how the expenditures are proposed, and we'll be going through some of these details component by component, but certainly the largest part of the budget is the revenue distribution to the member agencies, the channel licensees operation base, and then services and supplies, salaries. We're proposing $100,000 to be added to the formal reserve, and then $25,000 for fixed assets and $20,000 for contingencies. So the first component of the budget is administration and regulation. This is the franchise administration enforcement arm of the Cable Commission. We have a few positions. Currently, we have an ASO 3, Karen Liu, who is also your clerk. We have 2 senior office assistants, one recently filled, and we'll be talking about that later, I think, and one is currently unfilled, but we do have some temporary help as well. But one thing that we're proposing today is that with having a small staff, having a part-time executive director, I believe Karen, the ASO 3 position, needs more administrative help at a higher level. So we're proposing, rather than filling the second senior office position, that we convert it to an ASO 1 position, and that way they can certainly do some of the clerical type tasks, but also many of the administrative and budget and other types of administrative requirements for the Cable Commission. Right now, we don't have a lot of redundancy for succession planning, for redundancy, and also for segregation of duties. I think this is an important step, and it's something that we should do. Also, today's budget, we were presenting COLAs. As you know, our positions are tied to county positions, so this COLA represents the COLAs at the tied position at the county and other salary adjustments, I should say. So the tied positions are getting a 2% COLA, and then another 1 to 2% salary adjustment depending on the position that those positions are tied to. Here's a few general fund highlights. $250,000 for legal counsel, accounting service, which is mostly audits. Consultant services, we have the flexibility to bring in consultants, and this gives me this flexibility. We do have an agreement with the past executive director, and even though we haven't used him in the past couple of years, he's still a valuable resource that may be called in, this would allow some other consultant contracts as well. Like I said, I'm proposing another $100,000 addition to the reserves. Just so you know, the current reserve fund balance before that $100,000 is $479,000. And then also a couple of years ago, your board opted into the CalPERS program to fund other than post-employment benefits. It's called an OPED trust. This year's calculation shows putting $83,600 into that trust. And I believe this is our second year of putting money into that trust. Second year, yes, this is our second year. So, I believe a couple of years we have an accountant do a study that recommends, what these amounts should be, and this amount is consistent with that study. Component 2 is closed captioning, and as your board is aware, we've been closed captioning Cable Commission meetings filmed and broadcast by the Cable Commission since 2006. Well over 90% of our meetings are closed caption, and this year we're proposing funding of $110,000. That should give us the flexibility to caption all the meetings that we anticipate. Just to give you some highlights of 2014, we captioned 319 meetings, and the captioning hours of those meetings were 606.5 hours. Again, we're proposing to use Caption Colorado as our captioner, and part of today's package is an agreement with extending it for 1 year with Caption Colorado. Component 3 is Metro Cable. Metro Cable staff is responsible for cable casting the local government meetings. I continue to be amazed at what Metro Cable does with their small staff. They're led by Kristen Riggs, the new production director. We also have a programming coordinator. He's new. You've met him at the last meeting, Tyler Kinney. Our technical coordinator, Bill Piper. and then Joe Condry is our production assistant. In addition to them, we have approximately 9 part-time production assistants, and they film many of the meetings and do other various technical jobs related to the filming of the meetings, the cable casting of the meetings. In calendar year 2014, Metro Cable covered meetings for the 7 member agencies, 13 other agencies at 11 locations. They did a total of 351 meetings for a total of 686 hours. So they certainly put a lot of meetings on Metro Cable 14. Also, they do a few other productions. They assisted with the election forums that were held, as well as helped out with a few special requests for some of the member agencies. I know that they did a few memoriams for some local Sacramento people that were honored at the board and some other agencies. The next component is community programming. Your board does and has provided support for the channel licensees that program the PEG channels that the commission owns and by agreement are operated by these channel licensees. The channel licensees are Access Sacramento, KVIE, Sacramento Education, Cable Consortium, Sacramento Faith TV, and we also provide funding support for Capital Public Radio. They're not actually a channel licensee, but we play their music sometimes on Metro Cable, and the commission has a long history of supporting them as well. And I just want to point out that we provide funding for all of these entities except for Sacramento Faith TV, where we provide the channel, but we do not provide any funding. With that, I am proposing a 4% cost of living adjustment for the operations base for these entities. And also I want to point out that KVIE has requested that we move the base from the public education government fee fund to the general fund. And just to give you a little bit of history, when we hit the downturn, we asked the channel licensees to move as much of the base that we give them into the PEG fund as they could. What that did was it created more revenue in the general fund that could be distributed to the member agencies in those tough times. KVIE was, all of the licensees were great and they all participated, and I was very happy about that. And your board was as well. But KVIE moved their whole base into the PEG fund, and thereby freeing up a lot of money in the general fund. But now, given the extended downturn in the economy has affected KVIE. Their revenue is down, and they are requesting this year to move their base back into the general fund. And the way the budget is looking in this year, I think that's a request that could be accommodated. Also, in the general fund is a small $8,266 grant for digital audio equipment for Capital Public Radio. This slide just shows you the base that is provided to the channel licensees. It's the same as last year, or similar to last year, but the main base that we've been allocating to these entities from year to year, we're simply adding a 4% cost of living adjustment, if you will, adjustment to that. So Access Sacramento, they have an operations base. They've also get a hometown TV. It's a production they film. They provide community events. They send their truck out to there. We'll be talking about the truck requests later, but they send their current trailer out to those events and record them, as well as their Game of the Week broadcast, which we also provide an operations base for. Capital Public Radio, I mentioned the equipment request, and then we're proposing an operations base 4% higher than last year. KVIE, again, I said we're moving this from the PEG fund to the general fund. And then Sacramento Education Cable Consortium, they're operations based, plus they also get a Best Net operations based, and Best Net is the iNet for schools that your board has supported over the years. So with that brings me to the last component, some people's favorite component, the revenue distribution to the member agencies. This year we're proposing, well, first of all, last year, we're proposing a distribution that will get paid to the member agencies of $11.5 million, and that will be split up by population that is reported by the Department of Finance. This amount will be paid in June of 2015, and this is about $1.17 million over what was in the budget. And that's basically the standard philosophy that we budget the expected revenues from the cable companies. And hopefully we usually do get more than what we budget, and so we take the difference between what we budgeted and what we actually got, and then we distribute that to the member agencies as well. And today's actions will allow that to happen, and so the member agencies will be getting an increased distribution over what was in the budget, and they'll be getting that this June. With that, we're also proposing for next year, fiscal year 2015-2016, a revenue distribution of $10.7 million, and that's increased from what was budgeted this year of $10.3 million. And again, this is based on, and it gets split up based on those stats from the Department of Finance. And this slide just shows the actual revenue distribution that each member agency will get. I won't read those off, but they're here, and certainly if you have any questions about them, I'd be happy to answer them. I just thought it'd be good to let your commission see the recent history of franchise fee revenue. So this basically shows franchise fee revenue that we received each year from the companies, AT&T, Consolidated Communications, which used to be SureWest, and Comcast. And what we see is, a pretty steady increase in revenue, a little bit of flattening out during the downturn, but never a dip. And I know, certainly a lot of people predict, some people are cutting their cable, and some people are watching Hulu, and HBO Go and Showtime just offered a new service, and some people expect that eventually we may see some decreasing revenues, but I think the companies that we have doing business in town are still vibrant companies that are offering good services, and I think it's being reflected in these revenue distributions. Franchise fee receipts over the past years that still seemingly continue to increase.
And Bob, I just did a little math because I'm me, and it looks like we're growing, and Karen, maybe you can check me on that we're growing at about 5.5% average annual rate since 2008.
Bob?
I was going to actually do that calculation before the meeting, and I ran out of time, but knowing your ability to do math and just looking at it, I would be willing to bet that you are correct.
Okay, thank you.
So.
I'm in law school. I might be completely wrong.
Well, I'm an engineer, so I should probably be able to do it in my head, but I'm not going to attempt that for you. So that brings us, so that's the general fund budget, and then now what we have left is the PEG fee fund. The budget is 94B, and basically I'm going to talk about this fund just from this pie chart. So we expect a total expenditures of just over $3 million, and that's a combination of PEG fees, the 1% PEG fee that we expect to get next year from the cable companies, plus the fund balance that carries over, and that's why the amount is more than just the PEG fees that we will get, and interest too, but it's not all that much in interest. So with that, we have a lot of equipment proposed for the channel licensees. There's an equipment base that we talked about, but then also a one-time base. Metro Cable has certain projects that they'll be doing. We have some contingency. Member agencies request add up to about $600,000 this year, and then BestNet. Your commission has supported BestNet from the PEG fund for the last 4 years, and this is a 5th year of an approved $600,000 a year for 5 years. And this is the 5th year. Why the number here is $795 and not $600,000 is that also represents carryover funds that didn't completely get spent in the last year. So those billings are expected to hit next year. And with that will complete the 5th year of that 5-year funding strategy. I'm not going to go into equipment request in super detail. Most of the requests are for a control room, video, audio equipment, lighting, and production equipment. And for me to go through each agency and repeat that over and over probably is going to bore you. I do want to point out that the City of Citrus Heights is moving into a new chambers, and this their requests support equipment needed for that move. City of Folsom, I believe, has needed lighting for a long time, and I think lighting is in their request this year. The City of Sacramento is going to be doing improvements to their council chambers and also to their historic chambers. We funded a significant upgrade to the historic chambers a few years ago, and this is mostly equipment and other things related to making that historic chambers a more vibrantly used facility. With that, as far as the channel licensees, mostly it's, again, just production, lighting, equipment, equipment that certainly allows them to put their content on our PEG channels. Do want to point out SECC continues to ask for money for SIVA labs. Last year we actually budgeted for, Liz Rose will probably have to correct my numbers, but we budgeted for 2 labs in the beginning, but they were able to leverage that, and they were able to deliver about 8 labs, and I didn't check that number, so she can correct me, but I think those are close to the numbers. So again, in this year's budget, they're asking for some commission money for SIVA labs, but they also plan to leverage that to do more labs, and I don't have an exact number, but I expect that Liz will update that when she talks later on. Access Sacramento is asking for standard equipment type requests, but also is asking for a truck. I think I mentioned earlier they do the game of the week in Hometown TV with their current trailer that they have, and they have a lot of old equipment. They do a great service by putting these things on Access Sacramento. I think I've watched some of the high school games myself. They do a great job, but it's a little bit grainy, and I think that certainly this is something that is in need of an upgrade. Their request came, the truck request came in at about $700,000, so certainly that's a significant request. The commission did ask Access Sacramento a lot of questions about the request. Did they look at alternatives? Is this the best use of the money? What about insurance? What about security? If the commission invests, is this truck going to be secure? And Access Sacramento answered most of those questions. I think they've indicated that the maintenance, operations maintenance will not be that much more. In fact, with new equipment is likely to be less than with the current truck. Security, they keep it in a storage facility they have behind a gate with razor wire at the top. It's a lockable gate, and they have several locks in that gate. Of course, the truck would be insured as well. And Mr. Martin did get some updated quotes, and I think certainly the cost of insurance is going to increase, but I don't believe it's going to be that significant of a cost. They plan to operate the truck with about the same staff that they operate the current trailer, so it doesn't provide that much of an increase in their operations. So with that, that is certainly the largest PEG request that is before you today. And with that, I think those are most of the PEG requests that I wanted to highlight, unless I left something out or if your commission has any questions on that. And with that, I recommend that your board approve the fiscal year 2015 and 16 proposed general fund and PEG fee fund budgets to include all the resolutions that are included in today's package and all the exhibits and attachments. The only thing I want to add is I want to thank Karen Liu and her staff. Between doing all the PEG requests and Metro Cable staff as well, because they help the member agencies with the PEG requests and they help sort those out. But it takes a lot of work in a short amount of time to put together this budget, and it's led by Karen, and she does a really good job, and I just want to certainly recognize her for that. And with that, that is the budget, and certainly me or some of my staff can answer any questions that you may have.
Yes. Commissioner Frost? I don't have my chair set here.
I just have a couple of questions. I'm an alternate, so I'm not sure I understood correctly what you were saying. One of the things that my fellow council member, Mel Turner, who normally serves on this board, he was hoping that there could be more money to access Sacramento.
Okay.
And were you saying that there was in this budget, or?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, Gary Martin can speak for himself. I don't know that we accommodated every request that came from Access Sacramento, but I think that the 4% increase in the base is a very fair increase, and certainly on the PEG side, I don't think Access Sacramento will complain, and I think if your commission decides to fund the truck, then certainly a lot of funding, PEG funding, will be going to Access Sacramento this year.
And okay, and then the other question I have relates to the COLA, and I'm probably, I may not understand, because I'm coming from Citrus Heights and haven't really had a chance to really look at this. So my understanding, based on what you said, is that you are CalPERS. You're not part of the county retirement agency.
That is correct. Retirement is through CalPERS.
And so when they did the pension reform, I remember in Citrus Heights, they did the auditing and the actuarials, and they said that their actuarial is based on no more than 3% increase each year, overall increase each year. And so is it the same for all the entities, or should I assume that that was just Citrus Heights? And that's probably not a fair question to ask you on the spot, but I'm
it's
not
probably
sure.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
It's probably a question I would actually have to review and get back to you. I will say that if Citrus Heights had an OPED valuation done by an actuary, it would be based upon, specific to Citrus Heights and what retirement cost and other than post-employment benefits other than retirement costs that were. So our valuation was certainly specific to the commission. Yes, this did come out of an audit. I believe there's a GASB rule that required that we at least report what this OPED cost was. Some agencies decide to just fund it on their own, given the small size of the commission, and given knowing that someday there might be a handover of the commission, it made sense that I believe this commission board made a decision to, participate in a trust, to provide ongoing money towards those OPED costs, that will be incurred later on.
So you don't have unpaid pension liabilities with the cable?
So with the OPED, and again, I would probably have to double check this, but it doesn't, so it calculates the total liability, and I think calculates a strategy over time to put money into a trust to help meet those liabilities, but this isn't certainly taking care of all the liability today, but it comes up with a measured plan that
To over time.
to do over time, yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Oh, sure. Thank you.
All right, any other questions from the commissioners right now? I think go to our first speaker, Gary Martin.
Good afternoon.
And I don't have my set to toggle the timer, so I thought I'd just use an alarm on my phone.
Okay, it's going to be relatively short.
Okay.
I think I do have a PowerPoint that I'm going to briefly show you, though, but I'm not sure how to control it from here.
Oh. I'll control it, Gary.
We'll zoom really fast through it then.
I'll go through the slides then.
So first off, we, as Access Sacramento, want to thank the commission and the commission staff for the offer of what they've made. The 4% COLA we're delighted by, very, very pleased by that offer. We are particularly thankful to Bob and Karen and to the staff who have talked with us about our proposal and supported both HD truck integration plan last year. so that we could come up with a really appropriate HD truck option for us this time around. What Mayor Frost has made reference to is our conversations with most of you about some additional unrestricted support to our unrestricted side of the House. The COLA for us this year is just over $20,000. We are, however, looking at a state minimum wage increase and a fixed cost increase of about $17,750 that we know are going to go up this year. There's no way to get around that based on our budget without essentially not having the staff to pay. I mean, if we back off on staff, we don't have to pay those costs, obviously. So the ask here is for an additional $17,750 to cover the state minimum wage costs and our fixed cost increases. COLA at 4% does not meet the medical insurance increase of 7.8%. Doesn't meet a 9% workers' comp increase. There's a variety of fixed cost expenses, and so we're hoping for just a little bit more help to balance the budget and actually give that 4% COLA to the staff. And if you take a look at the slides here, we'll quickly kind of show you the RV that we use currently for Game of the Week and the staff that operated our Pig Bowl game this last year. Cameras replay all the folks that make that happen. Of course, Hometown TV and Game of the Week is out in Carmichael, out in Galt, Citrus Heights, the Crest Theater we move through. This is the July 4th parade a year ago in Carmichael. We, this last year, partnered with a variety of elected officials, including Congresswoman Matsui. We did the net neutrality field hearing from the state capitol. That was viewed by 7,800 people online, in addition to, of course, the people on the Sacramento area cable systems. We, of course, do our 2 live programs, Live Wire, 5 o'clock every Wednesday program about culture and arts. This is Ron Cooper in the red suit there, talking with kids from at Christmas time. We also have a variety of equipment that you've paid for out in the community, the Green Studios, and of course last year with your support, we broadcast and launched KUBU 96.5 FM. From a low-power FM station in the area. And so far we have broadcast since the end of April more than 70 hours of Sacramento City Council, Sacramento County Board of Supervisors, and now this first meeting of the Cable Commission on KUBU 96.5 FM. We are delighted with your support and for Bob's help. $17,000, I think I said $750, $17,550 would be a huge help to us this year. And thank you on behalf of Access Sacramento. Chairman, if you don't mind, I think the next speaker is Joanne Fuller.
Yes.
And Joanne Fuller is our board chair. And if, with your discretion, I'd like to at least say thank you to Joanne, who this year, after 6 years on our board and the last 2 years as chair, 2 years, 4 years, for a long time as chair, is termed out. So this will be her last appearance before you as chair of the Access Sacramento board, and we thank her for her service and allow her to speak now. I'll get out of the way.
And I'm here on behalf of the board, thanking you for really enabling Access Sacramento to do what we do in this very diverse community of ours. Lots of people come through Access and learn lots of things and really engage with our community. So we thank you very much for all that you do for us. We're proud of what we do, and really thank you for helping us give voice to our community. And I have the honor of introducing the next chair of Access Sacramento's board, Joanna Davis.
I didn't know that she was introducing me. But I would also like to express my sincere gratitude for all of the support that you've given to Access Sacramento over the years, and being able to broadcast through the radio station this year has been a tremendous accomplishment for the entire community. I would also like to say, as a member of Access Sacramento, it's personally helped me. I see Access Sacramento as a way to help people gain employment. People are getting job training by going through these programs. And I know it personally has helped me. I'm a single parent. I'm very active in this community. And it gave me skills that I've been able to use at the California State PTA and really raise awareness on parent engagement. So every day I'm constantly working on videos, and this is something that gives well beyond an individual. It gives to our entire community and our state. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Next, I have Jim Jorgensen. Jorgensen?
Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Jim Jorgensen, and I'm a member of the National Football Foundation College Hall of Fame Sacramento Valley chapter. We began in 1985, and it was begun by Bill Conlon, Sacramento Union, Father Ed Callanan, principal of Jesuit High School. Each year, we have two events, and one of them is our Scholar Athlete Awards Banquet, where we recognize 35 high school seniors who have GPAs of 3.5 to 4.5, and they're going to Brown, UCLA, Washington, Air Force Academy, etc. The other event we have is a kickoff brunch at the Carmichael Elks on August 23rd. It's a Sunday morning. And Access Sacramento has been part of that, along with Max Preps and the Sacramento Bee, to help publicize the high school football programs, the coaches, and they get up and they tell stories briefly, and it goes 2 or 3 hours. We have representatives from Access, the Bee, and Max Preps, who are our sponsors. And through the efforts of Gary Martin, he's been a sponsor for Sacramento Access. Each week, the 10, 11 weeks of high school football, a game of the week is broadcast. Grant High School, Elk Grove, Folsom, state champions. At the end of the year, there's an all-star video put together. Many of those all-star plays come from the games that they film during the year. So it's a very worthwhile program, and Access has been part of that, and we ask that you support the request for a budget. And Mr. Natoli left, but I used to referee high school basketball games for his dad at Galt High School. Did he get technical fouled and thrown out? So, any questions?
No?
Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Next, I have Gary Bell.
Good afternoon to the commission. I'm here with Pat Lamar. We are part of the same
duo
organization.
Okay.
My name is Gary Bell, and I'm one of the executive producers and co-founders of the Northern California Filmmakers Coalition, otherwise known as NCFC. And our vision is to make Sacramento a hub for filmmakers in Northern California, and our mission is to provide filmmakers an opportunity to network, to come together, and to rub elbows with professionals in the filmmaking industry. And because of Access Sacramento and your support of Access, we want to just profoundly thank you for that. We are able to move in that direction. We meet every week at Access Sacramento, and the folks that come to our meetings are involved in learning about filmmaking, learning about television production, and it's an exciting time for the filmmaking community to come together and to realize a lot of their vision. We produce a television series at Access called Sacramento Filmworks, where we show you how film works. Watch it. And it comes on once a month, and it's full of information on filmmaking. Every time we air, we have a industry expert from Hollywood. Sometimes we have actual stars, such as Tim Russ has been on the show, Chris Hawley from State of Affairs, all here at Access Sacramento. And we begin to get notoriety from the Sacramento Bee and other media. And it's all because of your support for Access Sacramento. So we just want to say thank you, thank you, thank you for what you're doing, and to continue to do so.
The other thing I'd like to say are the members that are with our organization, they take the classes that are offered by Access and are very excited about that. In turn, they come back to the organization and they help us with the cinematography, all of that education they've received from Access. And I can't tell you how appreciative they are, and if you see the self-esteem that a lot of these members have once they go through the program, it just changes their lives. We're talking about people that went from no jobs to a learning mode, and now they have jobs. It's been very important, so we do appreciate you and all that you've done. It's dearly needed, so we would appreciate your support. And so we can continue doing what we're doing.
Yes, and we just can't say thank you enough again, and please continue to support Access Sacramento, especially with their budget requests. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And that's it for public speakers, so that brings it back down here for any questions or deliberations. I'm certain.
Yeah, my question, I'm the new guy here, kind of like Mayor Frost over here, but was there a thought or consideration in the budgeting for Access based on the upcoming scheduled minimum wage increases?
I recommended a budget based upon what had been the kind of a philosophy that what we embarked on before the downturn, and then during of recommending a COLA, often commensurate with the same type of adjustment that staff is getting. So that provides a measured increase in allocation to the channel licensees. And of course, that's on top of not just their staff costs, but that's just on top of the whole entire base. And then how they spend that base is up to them. So we certainly reviewed Mr. Martin's request, which did have those things in there. I looked at it as a more sticking with the philosophy that we embarked on, except during the downturn, where we did hold those things back. And I think I know that it sounds like we're have a difference of $17,000, which to me in the scheme of the whole funding that is being allocated to Access Sacramento, I don't think is that great. I would certainly recommend that you support my recommendation, but obviously your board may decide something different.
Yeah, I guess it makes me think back about when the decision to change the minimum wage increase happened a couple years ago at the state budgeting level. Some of the unintended consequences that came about immediately after there were great programs like child care services, and now we're seeing with Access Sacramento where their administrative costs are making it difficult for them to provide those good progressive services. So while I see that the 4% COLA is a good policy to move forward, it almost seems that it would be appropriate to skew the support for the consideration of those growths. And I'm not sure so much about the fixed costs, but at least given the scales that we're seeing that are going to come up, it seems it would be appropriate. And I'm not sure that my colleagues are with that, but I would be supportive of that increase.
Any other comments on the left?
I do have one, actually.
Lisa?
Thank you. I tend to agree with Commissioner Guerra. I would hate to have the impacts of the cost of doing business per se to impact their ability to staff and continue staffing. I guess my question is, how does that impact the commission, the $17,000 or $18,000?
I wouldn't think it would be that significant of an impact. I would have to, we would have to, figure out where to adjust the budget to accommodate that.
Right. Have you given that any thought yet, or is it not such a great amount that we need to quibble over it, so to speak? But
I know I was pretty conservative in the estimated franchise fees increase. So if we could potentially increase the estimated franchise fees by that amount, and that would cover it. And I don't think that would be such a significant difference that it would put the franchise fee expectation in jeopardy significantly more than where we are right now.
Okay, I would tend to support it based on, but I'd like to hear from my colleagues. Thanks.
Commissioner Moore?
Yeah, thanks, Ted. Well, I have just a little bit difference of opinion, and again, not to argue about how much this means to the entire general fund or its noble cause. I guess my issue is that I appreciate the consistency in the general fund budget as far as these COLAs. I think if there's a desire to chase expenses that are being borne by some of these folks, then it should be applied to all of them. This gets into a lot of interesting conversation. We don't know where the minimum wage is going. We don't know if it's going to change locally here in Sacramento. There's been talk of that. Certainly there's proposals at the state level, and there's even a ballot initiative that's being spun up related to that. So for us to try and chase these things specifically, I think is a dangerous precedent. And I think everybody has to learn to live inside as was mentioned, the consequences of some of these decisions that are being made above our level. So my preference would be is if there's an interest in moving these numbers up, that it be consistent. I don't want to get to the point where I'm debating over one licensee over another related to who gets what, because these budget meetings go a lot longer if everybody feels like, hey, if I just get up there and make a pitch, we're soft-hearted people up here and want to help them out. So my interest would be is that if that's the desire of this board, is that we look at what these numbers are and make this general recommendation across all of the licensees instead of playing this game of chasing stuff. So if that COLA needs to go up, it go across the board. If not, and maybe this is a place where we say no, but let's consider for next year. Again, this isn't a massive number, but then next year maybe revise how we deal with this. But I'm amenable one way or another. I'm just looking for some consistency related to that. So.
Commissioner Gonzalez?
Thank you. I have a question, actually. Hopefully, Gary, can you come back up, Mr. Martin, and so you can help me not butcher this. We met last week at Access, and we discussed some items in the budget. And thank you for going so thoroughly. I was extremely impressed with the truck discussion, and it seems like even though it's a large number, you guys really whittled it down to something that was explainable, and also you pulled out some other expenditures you had planned at the last minute there to really show your sacrifice. But there was an item in the budget you discussed with me in particular that you were concerned about it being a one-time fee or a rollover fee, something to add to the base. Could you elaborate on that for me and the commissioners?
Sure. The discussion based on last year's vote was that on two pieces, the money that was for the Coloma rent increase last year had been a one-time only funded request based on the motion, and so Bob this year was very gracious in including that rent in his recommendation on the PEG side, and again I believe that would be perceived to be a ongoing kind of a base improvement, or to be continued as a single line item. My discussion with you said that for the increase on the PEG side for the rent, If the motion was to include that as a permanent part of the base, then we don't have to request that as an individual item the next couple of years. In the same way that if we were fortunate enough to have your support to increase for the minimum wage and fixed cost increases, that would be indicated as a permanent addition to the base, so we don't have to ask for that amount and maybe anything else in future years. Just the language of the motion to include permanent to the base as a recommendation.
So the language right now has the rent increase that actually happened last year still to be a one-time again for this year?
It would be a separate line item, I think, is the way that Bob has recommended it, so that it's differentiated from the traditional base as simply a line item against the rent. If it rolls over into our base amount, it means that if there was a COLA next year, that $67.50 would be added in. By keeping it as a single line item, I think Bob is probably figuring that through 2017, when our rent is stable, that it doesn't get the COLA.
Okay, thank you.
Any other comments on the right? I had one thing I wanted to raise and float it out there to see what other commissioners are thinking. And Karen, were you able to verify, was I right on 5.5% average annual growth?
I am not able to do that, sir, at this meeting. I can do that for you after.
Oh, after, okay. Because that's what I came up with, and I see that we're projecting a decline of $665,000 for our budgeted franchise fee revenue from 13,665 to 13 even.
Correct, an increase over the amount budgeted last year, but a decrease from the actual revenue received. Yes.
Because I was just looking back at that slide where we were showing the revenue still growing year after year after year, and I think I'm right that it's 5.5%. So I was wondering, looking at some of the needs at the member agencies, looking at some of the one need we have identified here is a relatively small amount. Do we stay this conservative as a commission on our revenue projection? Do we want to bring that up and anticipate some growth? I think I kind of wanted to throw that out there, see what the thoughts are.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the reasons why, again, we can consider these sorts of requests, but, I think some of these folks might be surprised that we'd be willing to accommodate that, and I'd like them to, they might be able to make those same arguments depending on how many people they employ. So yeah, I think that's a great point, is that, in the grand scheme of things, I think it's easy to accommodate, but, you just look at precedence and consistency, and that's all I'm really after here. So.
And I was after more the bigger policy issue of where do we want to adjust in a larger sense our revenue anticipation based on our past historic growth. And I think I share your concerns about precedent and what are we doing with our other, because who else are we funding 4% COLAs for other than Access?
Access Sacramento, SECC, KVIE, and Capital Public Radio.
Okay. And do we have the same policy in place for all four of them?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, no, I was just going to, I think there's two different policies. The COLA is obviously, it is what it is, a cost of living adjustment, so it's based on other market forces. But, the bigger policy decisions, some of them, like the minimum wage, make direct fixed costs that I think impact them. And to me, I mean, just my own experience with the licensees, like KVIE and Capital Public Radio, they're at a much different scale than Access Sacramento. If there's a frugal organization, it's Access Sacramento. They've been able to figure out how to make things work. So I feel comfortable with that small amount, and I do actually take a large. I do respect the opinion that was brought, the contrary opinion that was brought up. But given the size and the organization, I would be willing to support that kind of change to the budget.
Let me attempt to, in the interest of time, because I have to get out of here in a few minutes, but I'd like to be a part of this. It is, so I'm looking at Access Sacramento's general fund based budgets, and the 503 or 504,000 would be, that was the 2014-15 budget. The proposed with the 4% COLA raises that up about 20,000, right?
Right.
And they're interested in, what was the number?
17,750, I believe.
So, you know, one way to try and handle this that would give me some comfort is to take Ted's suggestion, just so we don't change all the budgeted numbers on the general fund. We'll just move that number out as far as the projected revenue, you know, based on, you know, just looking at, you know, what that trend line has been. We've got a decent sized reserve, so if we kind of mess up that assumption a little bit, we can work that. So again, this is a relatively small number, smithing here inside of a big number. And then to make that work is just make it a, I don't know if that would be a 7% COLA across the board for all these folks to get, so that would get the 17,000 into Access Sacramento, maintain the consistency, and again, all these are relatively small numbers on these folks. So KVIE, which is now general fund, as well as Capital Public Radio and the SECC, isn't a game changer in my mind, but it kind of maintains that consistency. It gets these people a little bit of a push. Has been recognized. We went through a lot of lean times, and there were no COLAs for these groups. In fact, I remember some significant cuts at one time way back. So I don't normally do that sort of stuff. And you know, my appeal to these folks is you know, just because there's a 4% COLA doesn't mean you immediately apply that as raises for employees. I mean, I think we all understand there's a lot that goes into the increased cost of operation, you know, as far as inflation and all those sorts of things, is to, you know, use that money in the way you see fit. Obviously, it's general fund money, but my other message would be, don't get used to this sort of a solution, but you know, I think there are some arguments that I've just made that can kind of work along these lines, and you know, that's just an option out there. I don't know if there's any interest in that, but it doesn't move the numbers in a large way. I think it kind of solves some of our initial dilemmas here, and you know, we'll look at the budget next year and see where we land.
Are you making a motion?
I'll make that a motion.
And I'll second that.
Well, and I want to interject. I guess my question is, what are we doing with because I was looking at the revenue number as an opportunity to gain some additional revenue back to the general fund budgets of the member agencies, and thinking about some of the unmet needs we still have at the county going into our budget hearings a week and a half from now. And that's where I think I'd probably look to my other county partners on the commission, what you all think about, you know, our actual for fiscal year 14-15 franchise fee revenue is $13,665,000. Do we want to keep that number flat? Do we want to even grow from there? Do we want to go back down and budget at 13 million even for the coming fiscal year?
Based on the motion, we're adding revenue to the overall budget, aren't we?
Based on the motion, I believe it was 7% across the board.
So let me clarify just in you know, kind of some rough numbers here. Is what we'd be doing is, you know, before this consideration, which I'm certainly willing to entertain as well, is increasing this budgetary assumption by the amount necessary to cover the 7% instead of just the 4% COLA. And just looking at the rough numbers there, that would probably add about 30 to 35,000 to that request to the licensees, because we have the 17,000 Access Sacramento, and again, being consistent across the other licensees, right?
I actually think it would be more, Karen can help check my math, but the growth of the base that in the general fund, because there's also, we have the PEG fund as well, but the growth of the base in the general fund based upon the 4% COLA went from 838,561 to 1,087,722, which was a 249,161 increase.
Well, I'm just looking at the channel licensees base.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, that,
Okay, I was applying that to the whole base. That's true.
just the base that's going to the licensees. So if you look at that, again, that's why this doesn't make me so nervous as far as, again, I think we'd be looking at about a $35,000 increase to that. And I don't know, one of the reasons that jumps up that much, Bob, is because you moved the KVIE out of the base and into the general fund. So it's not that much of an increase on that.
So the Access Sacramento operations base was $405,000. The public radio base was $18,233. The KVIE, it's been that traditional base, but it's coming back from the PEG fund, but I believe the COLA would apply to that too, and that would be $207,394 would be that base. And then the operations base for SECC would be was based on $259,356, and then the question would be also the best net operations base, whether it would be applied to that as well.
Yeah, I was actually just assuming across the board for all those line items in each one of those bases, so that, hometown TV, game of the week, I assume they're paying people to do that sort of stuff, so they move that increase, that $17,000, you can move that around any way you feel fit. And again, so all those, so that's what I was looking at was, so if you take an additional 3%, and if that's the number that gets up to this request, 3% of $1 million is 30,000, and that's $1.1 million almost. So again, between 30 and 35,000 is what I'm just roughly coming up with. So then, getting to Ted's point here is where's the comfort level related to moving this revenue assumption number for FY15-16, so that even after the decrease of this 35,000, there's a net proposed increase to all the member agencies here. So that can be kind of part two of the discussion here.
Right.
So do you understand where I'm coming from on that, Bob, as far as that 4 to 7%? And I don't know if that's the right number, but it seems close.
Yeah, I'm just kind of checking that math, and I'm almost there. Fine. But it's, you said roughly $1 million. It was pretty darn close. If you add up the bases in the operations without talking about the PEG, and it's still another question I would have, I think that's $947,442. And that includes all the operations bases. It does not include the hometown TV or the game of the week or the one-time equipment, but I did include the best net base. So
all I'm doing is taking this. It doesn't have page 4 of 8 on our agenda item 2 here. Is I'm just looking at that top matrix there.
Right.
And so I'm just looking at every number on the right-hand column there instead of that proposed 4% increase, it's a 7% increase. So you see that bottom total number there of 1.087 million. That's what I'm working off of.
But you're giving a 3% on top of the 4.
Right.
So it's what you're doing is more than the 7% if you did that.
Right, if you compound it, right.
It's compounded.
So I don't think we would compound it. I think we would just add
figure out what the number.
We would do a 7% instead of a 4%.
Right. Exactly.
And
that's what I'm saying. That's a good
I believe the 30,000 is, and I apologize, it took me a while to get there, but I believe the 30,000 is a good rough estimate. I got 28,423. Obviously, in the forum, that number could be somewhat wrong, but I think we're pretty close. So, so I believe if you stated that you wanted to apply a 7% base rather than a 4% base COLA increase, but not to the hometown TV or the game of the week.
No, I'm saying add it
to and to. Okay, I apologize. I misheard that.
That keeps all that whole, and I think that gets them to this.
And it's easier to apply too. Right. I was just trying to repeat what I thought was the recommendation. Then I would just say make the motion to approve the general fund, but with a 7% COLA to the channel licensees operation base rather than a 4%, and to fund that with increased expectations of revenues.
Right. So then. And if everybody's okay with that, part one.
That's
okay.
part one.
So let's let Ted take the discussion here on the.
Okay. So part 2, and I'll put a number out, which is probably too high, but start there. If we grow 5.5% from the actual revenue this year of $13,665,000, if we project a 5.5% increase from there, we'd be at $14,400,000, $14,422,000. That would accrue back to the county about $550, net of the $30,000, probably about $550,000 for our general fund budget for a week and a half from now. I'm okay with going at 14.4 for our projected franchise fee revenue, but I don't know if everyone else is. I just wanted to put it out there that that's where I had the math come out if we continue to grow at 5.5% annually.
I mean, if the revenue assumptions are what they've been showing on that slide, and really the introduction of online products hasn't affected it, and it's continuing to increase, I guess I feel comfortable with that. I was always under the assumption that we were going the other way because of online participation. I mean, I what do you call that? Binge watch on Netflix? Is that? Yeah, that's.
Well, I do that too, but I also have a cable.
That's true too. So do I. So okay. But I would be comfortable with that, given the information I just saw.
So and then let me just clarify one other thing. So we go through this next fiscal year, and we come up with this this modified budgetary assumption that's larger than the conservative stuff that I appreciate you provide us here. We get to the end of the fiscal year, just like we're seeing here, and it gets trued up anyway, correct? I mean, so this time around, the number came out larger, right? Technically, if we end up falling short of an increased revenue assumption, the distributions to the franchisee agencies would just end up being a little less than would be projected in a modified budget, right? I mean, unless we wanted to take some out of reserves to meet the projected numbers, I suppose.
For franchise fees for fiscal year 14-15, that is the actual number. 13,679 is what we have. It's not an estimate. That is actual
for
the revenue
for 14-15, right?
14-15.
13,679.
And I think what to Ted's point was he was saying, okay, if there's this, we'll assume the growth. Well, what do you assume that revenue is for 15-16?
Yeah,
so if the actual was 13. What did you say, Karen?
13,679, 765.
I do appreciate, and believe me, I mean, I'm not trying to contest. I do appreciate trying to be a little bit more aggressive in the estimation. I never in the history of the Cable Commission have we gone above what last year's was.
Okay.
Your board can make the recommendation, and I certainly respect that. If last year's franchise fees was $13.6 million, I would prefer to see it based on that and not the inflated on top of that. Because, yes, it's true, it would just be a true up in the end, but I also know how that impacts budgets. And when this year we have a nice surprise, we're adding some needed revenue to the budgets, and people are happy about that. When the shoe's on the other foot and you're taking expected revenue away, it certainly creates some waves that I personally don't like to create. So I would certainly recommend that you not go up as high as the chair suggests, but possibly go to last year's revenue or some other number that you pick.
We'll go to last year's. What are we at?
What's
this budget based on?
The actuals for this fiscal year, Karen?
13,679.
Is that what you assume for next year?
We assume 13.
We were conservative.
13 even, so we're even assuming
less, right?
Okay, yeah.
And that's my conservative nature of budgeting.
Well, and I appreciate that concern, Bob, but I think all of us at our agencies are used to, especially 3 and 4 and 5 years ago, seeing numbers come way in under what we wanted to see them. So we deal with that. I don't know. This exercise doesn't affect the city of Folsom much in any way, because we don't, we probably will even take this budgeted number and not look at it as being that large. But I'm certainly willing to entertain a motion that moves that up, and with the understanding that this will get trued up at the end of the fiscal year. So.
Just a quick question here. Do we have a reserve policy at all, or is it that's just the number that you've been budgeting as far as our reserve?
The reserve is just been a look every year. Actually, the commission used to go on no reserve because so much money came in, and then it didn't take out that much money to run the commission, and so for a while the policy of the commission was no reserve. But we've really been looking at, in the future there could be a transition of the commission to another entity. There could be situations where laws cause fluctuations in franchise fees that are abrupt. And so I've felt it prudent to, over the past several years, to incrementally build up the reserve. And I don't have a target for that yet. So it's been a year-to-year look. But I feel I feel that if we did, in the middle of the year, come up against some unexpected things, then yes, the reserve could be looked at as possible funding for whatever that unexpected thing is. So I think the reserve certainly serves a couple of purposes. Hopefully we never have to touch the reserve and it's there for future reasons. But yes, we do have that reserve, and it's been a year-to-year look.
I'm looking at it, Amy, from putting my second floor hat on. We have more room to absorb a miss in our revenue estimate of a couple $100,000 now than we've had, and as long as I can remember. I remember a few years ago changing the revenue estimate for cable franchise fees to come up with maybe $200,000 more for the board of supervisors to deal with in budget, and being really anxious about what it would mean if we missed that number. Now we're certainly in a different budgeting environment at the macro level with the member agencies. There's more capacity to absorb a miss here or there. So I guess I'm kind of looking to other commissioners for where do we feel comfortable landing with our revenue estimate that we're going to carry back to our member agencies, that we can go back to, I can go back to my boss, to Supervisor McGlashan, and say, I think we've got a reliable number here, and we should hit this. And that's, I think, the number that I wanted to look to, is how can we be helpful to the member agencies, but not overly helpful to the point that we get too excited about where we think the revenue is going to come in.
Well, if you're comfortable with the motion that was made on the 7% and going up to the 13.6 plus of equal of last year's budget, I'd be willing to go along with that.
Fair point.
Is that
yep.
Okay? So so $13,679,000 with a 7% COLA for the
Across the board.
franchisees. Okay.
Yep, I like that.
So I will make that motion.
Could I clarify one point in your motion? We've tracked this base for a year, and some of the channel licensees have moved their base to the PEG fund.
Okay.
So then the question would be, would this 7% COLA also apply to the bases that had been moved to the PEG fund?
And that would come out of PEG fund
We would have
revenues?
to, I don't think it would be that big of a revenue swing, but we would have to kind of adjust that revenue too to compensate for that.
I'll look to Commissioner Warren for guidance on that.
That's fine, if that's not a big number.
I don't believe it is. And we could come back at final budget with a true-up if something looks like it was more significant than we thought at this meeting today.
So I'm okay with that.
Okay.
I'll second the modified motion.
Okay. Commissioner Frost? Yes.
I just want to say I heard a lot today, and haven't spent a lot of time with this budget, and so I'm probably not going to vote against it, but I'm probably going to abstain because I'm not sure it would be fair for me to take a position without feeling comfortable that I had a chance to look at all the information. I like your conservative nature. That's the way I think, so I think that's a good thing. So I just wanted to let you know that. Thank you.
Ted?
Yes.
I want to say I'm prepared to support the motion, the amended motion, but I'd just like to reiterate that what I've heard the discussion here is that, the recipients of these funds shouldn't just count on the generosity of this board all the time as fixing their needs, that the comment earlier about looking at your own house, planning, and I don't want to get into the debate about the minimum wage or anything like that, but you have to live within your means. And this, I'm prepared to support this motion, but I hope that this does not become an ongoing dialogue every budget session.
And I think on that point, perhaps we should have a discussion as a commission about setting a policy that we can all, maybe not all agree on, but we'll have a policy for how do we handle cost of living adjustment calculations in the future, and how do we cover outside costs such as SSI, Medicare, minimum wage increases, things like that. What do we as a commission set as a policy when we increase allocations to cover those things?
Do we know what the cost of living increase was this year?
Well, it was 4%. The issue that came up was that on top of the 4, when you raise the minimum wage 4%, then there's also the Social Security payment goes up by that amount, and the Medicare withholding tax and disability withholdings all go up by that amount as well. And the initial allocation did not cover those costs.
You're talking about this budget.
This budget.
But what about do we know on the federal level what it was?
I should clarify that, that the way that the county COLAs were allocated this year, it was a 2 to a 4% cost of living directly based on the CPI from last year. And since that number was less than 2%, that came in at 2%. But then there was also additional salary adjustment given to different classes of employees. In fact, the ones that tie to the Cable Commission, the range will be 3 to 4%, but actually it's 3.9 or 4%, depending on which class we're talking about. So you have CPI and then you have salary adjustment. Now last year, the channel licensees got 2%, and I know that was probably on the low end when you looked at what a lot of the classes at the county got. So I felt that 4% was certainly increased from last year and better. But I just want to point out that the actual CPI COLA wasn't 4%. It was actually probably less than 2%.
Yeah, because the residents who are on Social Security, I think they got 1.7%.
That sounds correct. So that's a good question, and that's a good clarification. And I still think the recommendations today for staff and for the channel licensees are prudent. But when we say COLA, what we really mean is adjustment. It's not a straight COLA, and it's not straight based on the CPI.
Oh, okay.
So you are correct.
Commissioner Gonzalez?
I just want to mirror the commissioner's comments a moment ago about looking at your own house. And actually, in my discussions this previous week with the executive director, Martin, of Access Sacramento, we actually had that discussion about looking at interior efficiencies and seeing what we could do to improve them, and already had a discussion about partnering with local agency SMUD to do like an energy audit, seeing what other free resources are out there to make sure that we are running at peak efficiency, and he seemed very receptive to doing that, and I would just charge him with attempting to do that so that next year you can kind of bring to the board, and thank you very much for the COLA, and we also took these practices into account, saved X amount. So, but I think it's a very good comment that it's worth noting.
Okay. Commissioner Detrick?
Yeah, just real quick, I had some of the same discussions with Gary and his team, and also talked about them looking at other revenue streams and not using the Cable Commission as the revenue stream for everything. And that goes to all the licensees. And you guys do a phenomenal job, no question, and appreciate everything you do. But again, it's I think the comment living within the means is. But the other issue on the flip side of that is people are changing make a moving target on you with changing some of the way the game's played. So and that's why we're being a little bit more generous, I think, this year than years past. But appreciate everything.
And I would like to echo Commissioner Schmidt's comments. I think I really would like to have a discussion, a policy-based discussion about going forward, what do we kind of give direction to staff as to what we will and won't agree to, and then obviously every budget session, you can redebate it again, but I'd at least like to have that policy discussion separate and apart from allocating the funds so that we have a consideration and give you clear direction as to what the expectation of the commission is when these requests come in. And I think, potentially we're going to have to deal with issues about local minimum wages and minimum wage being different in the unincorporated area of the county than in the city of Sacramento. And if that's the case, then what, if there are not franchisees, licensees operating inside the city and some operating outside of the city, how are we by policy going to address that? So I think we need to have that discussion.
I'd support that.
So you're requesting a staff report back at
Yeah, we can. I think you and I can probably talk. Are we allowed to discuss that, Harriet, outside of session? Kind of.
I would think that you would. I mean, you've indicated intent. I think that the executive director should meet with the chair.
Okay.
Back on a separate meeting.
Okay. Perfect. So then add that, I suppose, to the motion.
Sure. Yeah, I just had one last comment to go add to that report. Maybe one thing we also want to consider is, as much as a member organization, we want to see those revenue numbers come up and come back to us. But if we don't have a reserve policy, maybe maybe we want to also look at if there are revenue increases, that we look at those increases going to the reserve versus just, how much do we give back to the member cities and counties, and how much do we put into the reserve? So might think about that if we're continuing to see these increases. So if we could add that to the conversation, that would be helpful.
That would be fine. Actually, I've discussed with administrative staff a reserve policy, and I haven't floated one out to the board yet, but we've certainly been embarking on a direction with the reserves, but I have had discussions but have not formulated such a policy, but I'm fine to look at that.
Okay. All right, so I guess I would amend my motion to include the direction that you and I meet to formulate a policy on those things, on the wage increases and covering, I guess, ancillary costs that are related to, not directly tied to, a cost of living adjustment. So that's my motion, along with the revenue increase and the 7% COLA. So 13,679.
Is that 13.6
13
million?
13,679,000.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And it's 7 across the board, 7% across the board,
Including the PEG fund.
Yeah.
Develop a policy too about the reserve.
And to just, come up with or at least develop a staff report and a presentation to the board at our next meeting 6 months from now or so when we next meet. Maybe that'll justify having a meeting sooner than 6 months.
We will likely have a meeting in September or October to go over a final budget. I'm not sure if we'll be ready then, but then typically we have at least one other meeting before the next budget meeting, and it's fine to have 2 meetings or however many we need, but we can figure out the right meeting for that.
Okay.
And I'll second that motion.
Okay.
And Karen will be watching the tape to make sure
everyone,
we get that motion.
Are we ready to vote?
Correct.
Karen?
Yes, I have enabled voting. Okay. The motion passes.
Great. Excellent. Thank you.
Okay. Take care. Good job.
And Dave and Liz, I'm sorry you're walking out of here with more money than you came in with, without even saying a word.
They'll take Gary out to dinner.
Thank you. Sometimes saying less is better.
Let's see. So I guess at that, next item, please.
Item number 3 is a resolution to approve the Fifth Amendment to the License and Operations Agreements.
And this is simply an extension of the license and operation agreement with the channel licensees, and it's the same as in past years, and I recommend that you support today's action.
I have no one signed up to speak, so any questions amongst the commissioners?
I'll move
and I'll second
the motion.
Please vote. Thank you. The motion passes.
Okay. Next item.
Item number 4 is the Sacramento County's calendar year 2015 investment policy.
Because our money is with the county and the county invests our money, we're required every year to have your board receive and file this policy.
Okay. I'll move that we receive and file the item.
And that actually didn't require
do we
motion,
even have
it's just
to
receive and file?
Yeah, we don't even have to take an action.
No,
okay.
sir.
If I read my script, I would have seen that. Next item, please.
Item number 5 is the election of a chair and vice chair for fiscal year 15-16.
And I'll leave this item up to the chair to direct.
I'm happy to continue on as chair in the next year. I know we've got a couple things going on that I thought it would be helpful to have consistency in the chair seat. So I'm happy to continue in this role. Well, I'm not nominating myself. I'm just volunteering.
I'll second it.
Right.
I'm currently vice chair, and I'm willing to either give it up or keep it on, depending on other people's wishes. But I would like the opportunity if no one else is crazy about it.
Do we have to vote on these separately?
You can vote on them separately or as a package. It's your choice.
This is discussion.
Unless you want to change your
I can amend my motion to nominate Ted Walter to remain chair for another year and nominate Isaac Gonzalez to remain
Second.
Right.
Please vote. And the motion passes. Thank you.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Continuing on my path towards the coup. Next item.
Item number 6 is a report from our executive director.
Thank you. I'll try to keep this short. The first part of this is the best. I want to introduce you to our new senior office assistant, Lisa Fouts. Stand up, Lisa. Lisa actually has been working for us as a temporary employee capacity, and she's been doing a phenomenal job. And so we're bringing her on as permanent. And just thanks for the help so far, Lisa, and look forward to having you on as a permanent Cable Commission employee.
Welcome and congratulations.
And with that, I just a couple other house items. We have an audit for Cable Commission, not the cable companies, but every 2 years we do a Cable Commission audit. That audit was just completed, and it's likely to be at your next meeting. So just giving you a heads up on that. And then the third item was related to a special board meeting, which I don't believe we need now, but we also are talking about the meetings for the remainder of 2015. We still actually get all these meetings on your calendar and then cancel them as we go on. It's not likely that we're going to need a meeting until September or October, and at this point I'm not sure which one it would be. So we'll leave the meetings on the schedule. I'll consult with the chair, and then Karen usually sends out cancellation announcements when we don't have a meeting. But I would say, hey, Karen, do you think that it's more likely to be September or October, or do you not know at this time?
It would be dependent on you and Harriet's schedule.
Yeah, do you think it's more likely to September or October?
My fingers do not want to turn on this microphone. I think there's a chance that we'll need a September meeting, but I just don't know right now.
Okay, so we'll assume it's likely to be a September meeting. If it doesn't happen in September, it will certainly happen in October. Okay. And then beyond that will be based upon the chair's discretion.
Okay. You'll let people know.
Mm-hmm. Yes, Karen will do that.
Karen will.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And that's the end of my general administrative report.
Next item?
Next item is to receive reports from state franchisees.
I had no one sign up to speak, and I don't see any of them in here, so next item, please.
Item number 8 is to receive verbal reports from channel licensee representatives.
Okay, and first up, I have Liz Rhodes. There's money falling out of your pocket.
Good afternoon. I'm Liz Rhodes, Executive Director of the Sacramento Educational Cable Consortium, and thank you very much for that money that's falling out of our pockets. I did want to comment about that, and I very much appreciate the fact that you made that straight across with the licensees, is that we do operate traditionally it's been about 50% of our income has come from you, and we've been getting funds from outside. Next year, we're running about $100,000 short. So that extra money is going to really help us. And that's just relative to the type of grants and things that we work with our school districts. And so that's always a very flexible number. Sometimes it's really good, and like next year, it's not quite so good. So we're going through a reorganization and dealing with that. So every little bit helps. Thank you very much for that. Now, on a really positive note, thank you for the funds for the SIVA labs. We had an absolutely wonderful award night, and I've got just a short clip, trying to keep this time short with you, but I want to share with you this clip that shows just a couple of the interviews that we did with the students, because as I've told you in the past, what we are able to do not only with the SIVA labs and the trainings that we're doing with the teachers and the students, but the fact that these students can actually show their programs on a cable system where they can go home and share with mom and dad and aunts and uncles and their neighbors is so empowering. It is unbelievable. So what we have here in Sacramento is incredible. And just to give you a little idea, if we can roll that clip so that you can see, these are just some, and they're not necessarily the award winners, but they're some of the students that were involved.
You can work with team members, you guys can cooperate and create a really awesome piece if you work hard. This project actually showed me that I am really capable of doing things on my own. It teaches us other life skills that we're going to need in other school subjects, like for other projects and things like that. I think it sort of gives you a little bit of an advantage. We just wanted to help people live a healthier and happier life. After watching my video, they all joined the martial arts program. Go Mustang! I worked on a video about to teach people that smoking is bad for you. I wish I could make a video that could actually change the world. Another day, another good deed. See somebody wasting water. We will now demonstrate what might happen if you fell off your bike without a helmet. Making a video is not as easy as it seems. We are the Good Fit Readers! Go wash your hands. You have bacteria all over them. What's bacteria? It's a very special activity that not many classes and people get to experience.
My job is a lot of fun. I get
When I heard I got picked for this, I'm like, yes, I could finally make movies for a good cause. That means it's time for First Things First on TJTV.
Any better than that when you have a student that says, I want to make a video that can change the world. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Liz. And next, Dave Lowe.
I'm going to have to do something about the order. I feel like Liz does that to me every time. I always have to go after kids. Thankfully, there's no babies and puppies and things like that. But I also want to echo what Liz said. We really appreciate that you looked at it as an across-the-board increase. It does matter a lot to KVIE. I know we were mentioned earlier as an organization that has larger dollar amounts, but this is the second largest grant that we receive on an annual basis. Our largest grant is actually used to pay for our PBS membership, and then it all goes away. So we're left to raise the funds for every single thing else. So we really appreciate the funds, the extra funds, and just want to let you know that on Saturday, we're hoping to bring back some Emmy Awards. Our station was nominated for the most regional Emmys in this area. Over all the commercial broadcasters, we were nominated for 13, and that's not for the Downton Abbey and the Nova and the Natures that you see. It's for our locally produced programs right here. So Rob on the Road as a host, KVIE for Station Excellence, and all kinds of other ones. So we're hoping to bring back some brass. Thank you.
Excellent. Arla?
Good afternoon, Arla Gibson, Development Director for Capital Public Radio, and I would like to echo my colleagues' thanks for the extra dollars. And as David said, our budget may be a little bit larger, but we do count on every penny, and so the increase is really special. So very much appreciate what you've done for us. So thank you so much.
Thank you. And Gary, closing down.
Well,
It may not look like I'm dancing a jig, but I really am. And for the staff who will get the raise and the other costs that will be covered, just thank you so much. And in order to kind of close this out, because I don't need to say anything more than thank you, I want to show you a quick video. We can't compete with the kids and we can't compete with Downton Abbey, but we can show you some special things that are happening in Sacramento County. So let's show you the video. It's not even 2 minutes long.
What do we need for this recipe?
I want to also thank Access Sacramento for providing the streaming online here for all of us, and they're absolutely wonderful here too.
So as a community of distinction, these things don't show up on television without your help. And thank you for allowing the voice of your residents, your people, to be on television. Thank you very much.
Thank you. That's it for speakers. So next item, please, Karen.
Item number 9 is to receive comments from the general public.
Okay. Members of the audience may comment on any item of interest within the subject matter jurisdiction of the commission. Each person will be allowed 3 minutes. No action may be taken on non-agendized items raised under public comment until the matter has been specifically included in a future agenda for discussion and action. If a member of the public wants a response to any specific question, they are encouraged to contact commission staff or any members of the board or commission. I don't have any speaker slips turned in. Is there anyone that wishes to speak now? Great. If not, then we stand adjourned.
Thank you.
Oh, oops, did I? Was there someone who wanted to speak that I missed? No. Okay.
I'd like to thank myself. Cable or media. Please don't give it to the ethnicities coming, arriving. They are more than before around us, and they like to be in media, and we can give them a chance to be raising their voice, and we benefit to know their culture. We benefit to know how to deal with them, because they will be citizens with us, and they have rights to live here, but we don't understand them sometimes. With the new chapter, what we have, the 4th one, in Carmichael, we'll do that. We'll focus on the ethnicities and do that, and you will see it in the media. And thank you very much for your support.
Thank you. And I think that's it. So now we properly stand adjourned.